And hello, and welcome to our first episode of the Vegan Party Conference live stream. And thank you for tuning in. If you're watching live, very warm welcome to you. If you're watching the recorded version, thanks for catching up. We've got an hour tonight. We've got two guests waiting in the studio. I'll be looking forward to bringing them on in just a minute. Just very going to briefly tell you a little bit about the Vegan Party Conference. It's a conference, a live conference in person, coming up end of September 28th to 29th at the Kensington Town Halls in London. And it's going to be a gathering of mainly animal rights, vegan and plant-based advocates, animal activists, campaigners. We'll have quite a lot of the main groups, some of the nationals there. There's quite a lot of grassroots activists, and it's very much, made up of panels, of workshops, skill sharing, training, honing some of our skills, look at some of the questions that affect our advocacy, things like language, and really trying to celebrate the amazing work that a lot of us are doing. It's also the Vegan Society celebrating 8 years. We've got Viva celebrating 30 years. Animal Justice Project celebrating 10 years. Veganuary celebrating 10 years. And the Vegan Runners are celebrating 20 years. Of course, a number of other groups that have, individuals who've got significant birthdays, but particularly those sort of alignment of significant birthdays is really interesting for our movement. Coupled with, I think, a sense of fresh optimism by the new Labour government that's come into power just 1 week ago today. That's really exciting. So briefly, the conference does have clear remits. It's very much 3 remits. One is to showcase our combined achievements and celebrate our collective successes as a movement and really see what a lot of us have been up to. That's very much the first remit. And the second one is to work from within our collective, optimize from within the current pool of activists and campaigners. We've got a fabulous pool of current activists and campaigners. This conference will help bring people together, collaborate, maybe share resources, sharpen some skills, focus on how we can maybe make some significant gains, particularly over the next few years. And then the third one is very much to attract new people and then try and increase that pool of activists. And that's very much part of the remit. So with that in mind, we're going over the next couple of months. It's going to be probably half a dozen of these live streams, going to bring on some really interesting guests to discuss some of the areas that are arising within the movement, some of the remits of the conference, some of the achievements we've been seeing, some of the route maps that we need to see if we're going to really push home on a number of levels. Our first 2 guests I did come up with actually back in December last year. So, we were originally going to do this in January, but I didn't really get this together until July. Here we are in July. And our first 2 guests were straight away there, though, partly because they represent, both sort of new school and some of the new thinking in the movement, coupled with some of the old school and some of the campaign that goes back, several decades. But also, grassroots campaigning and some of the nationals, the conference very much represents those sort of meeting of minds and people, but also because of their fabulous achievements right now, which are really interesting for the movement and quite significant this year, for reasons of which we may well come to. So first of all, I'm very happy to welcome our first guest, Dr. Laila Kassam from Animal Think Tank. Laila, hello, thanks for joining us.
Hi Tim, it's great to be here.
And here's Tom Harris from Shac Justice Project and various other areas of the world, and a renowned, famous author. The first book out just a few months ago. On that note, Laila, if you'd just like to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your work so that our viewers will get a quick picture and overview, and then Tom, I'll ask you to do the same.
Yeah, sure, Tim. So I'm a co-founder and co-director of an organisation called Animal Think Tank, We like to think of ourselves as a social movement organisation working to build the power of the UK movement to win institutional, legal and social changes needed to achieve fundamental rights for animals in the next 40 years. And we're currently focusing on 3 work streams, which are all to do with building the capacity of the movement. One is our strategy research, which is about developing a long-term roadmap for us and ideally for others in the movement. Secondly, we're focusing on narrative research and testing to help really inform and guide the movement's communications. And then thirdly, I think very similar to what you're trying to do is build unity within different groups and organizations within the movement so we can really maximize the power of the movement.
Brilliant, thanks Laila, and particularly the route map is really interesting concept. And Tom, recently author of this fabulous book, Your Neighbour Kills Puppies, which I have read and we'll talk about later. But Tom, do introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me, Tim. Hello, Laila. Hello, the world. I am Tom Harris. I have been around the animal liberation movement, kind of all parts of the movement, really, for over 20 years. I co-founded with my partner Nicola the Southern Animal Rights Coalition, and through that we closed down a military research facility that was using goats in deep diving experiments. We closed down several intensive chicken farms. We closed down a puppy farm. We did a lot of things. And then I was also a coordinator for the Shac campaign, Stop Huntingdon Animal Cruelty, which my book, Your Neighbour Kills Puppies, is the complete history of. And through that, I was going to say we nearly closed down Europe's largest animal testing lab. Like, technically, we did close down Europe's largest animal testing lab, but it's kind of a bittersweet victory. But we created a blueprint for a model that I think the government feared could end capitalism. So they came down pretty hard on us and kind of wanted to quash it. But yeah, so it's had a lot of inspiring impact, I think, around our movement and beyond. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. But yes, that's me.
David, yes, we could talk about both Animal Think Tank and your book just for a good hour on each subject, no problem, because they're both really, really interesting. But what we're going to do is just bring it towards actually the participation you've got in the conference, and particularly our first 2 panels that we're looking at. And Laila, you all got to host a panel on language matters. So language is a real focus in our movement. It's under a lot of discussion. Indeed, Tom, you and I were just discussing on Facebook just this morning, I seem to remember some interesting comments around language. But Laila, just tell us what you'll be, because I think Animal Think Tank have done quite a lot of research. What's the Animal Think Tank side on the language matters panel?
Yeah, so we've, as I said, one of our work streams is doing public research and testing on narratives and messages that can be really persuasive to the public. So we're very focused on what works and what's persuasive. And there's different levels in terms of language and narrative. So we've got sort of deep narratives, there's sort of the big ideas that society and that we live by that really influence our behaviors, our practices, and then sort of on top of that is messaging and then stories. But I think the thing that I would hope that this panel will highlight is actually the power of not just language but of framing. And framing is really about how an issue is presented, what's foregrounded, what's backgrounded, because that really influences how information is interpreted. To make this less abstract, I think, one of the frames that we tend to use in the movement is a food frame, which can be unhelpful because it really triggers this idea of individual or personal choice. And it's my choice, and also it kind of triggers this idea of futility as well, because it's like, well, if I change my diet, what's that going to do? And so I think we're trying to find other frames and other messages that can really be persuasive and move people to act. So something to counteract the food frame is really about keeping the focus on other animals as unique individuals and not thinking of them as products or commodities. The welfare frame is also one that we want to move away from, I think, and really get people thinking about animals as, beings who want to be free and who want to thrive. So these are the types of things that I think the panel will bring. And then in terms of, actual language, sort of within those frames, there's lots of debate around, for example, using terms like speciesism and oppression, and does that turn people on or off? And our focus groups have found, and our sort of survey research has found that actually, these can be, less persuasive. But again, it's about what context you're using them in. Who are you talking to about these? Are they people who are just, like initially hearing about these ideas, or are they people further along the journey? So yeah, I think there's so much that I could talk about, but the panel will really explore, both from a kind of research perspective from Animal Think Tank, what have we found in our research, but I think others on the panel will be talking about what they found in their sort of, street outreach and what works and what doesn't work.
Yes, and I'll mention that in a minute, but on that note, just about, use of language, I follow your, I've been following your work for a bit, and I did see the work, I think it came up last year actually, about the words using and about how some words, resonate better with people, and open up the door to a conversation. And this is particularly for people who are not vegan, may be receptive to a conversation. Certainly from my experience, when I've done radio work, I remember starting to use the word exploitation on the radio. Guaranteed shutters would come up. The broadcasters did not like that word one little bit, particularly when I was on BBC Radio Sussex, which is very much farming community, and I mentioned, farmers exploiting animals, and it's like bang, shutters going down. It's like off you go. We're not having you back, So there's a caution, and I think what I found interesting was that I had a builder, a decorator around, and I asked him about a moral question about moral consideration of animals, because I've noted that the moral consideration had a reasonable sort of response. People were quite okay to talk about moral positions, and far more so than speciesism or exploitation or oppression, which perhaps brought up the defences and sort of shut the conversation down there and then. I tried it with my builder, and I found he was really receptive to a conversation about moral. He had a lot to say, obviously he was a thinking person, and I think we had a good conversation. We listened, we were seeking learning outcome. It's a far better than kind of us and the shutters go down. So that's one really important thing. What's going to be brought to the table by the other people? We've got Wendy McGovern on this panel, who is a podcaster, an animal rights advocate, very articulate. And Wendy really pays attention to sort of language that we use in day-to-day work, like how we refer to animals. For example, we've probably moved on from calling pets to companion animals. I think Wendy's now moved on to talk about animal companions. With the emphasis being on the animals first. They're not commodities, they're not companions, and that's it. They're animals first, and then companions. So these kind of words, and like its and pronouns and such like, referring to other animals as individuals. Those are really interesting. Wendy's going to make a really, really good guest for the panel. And then, as you mentioned, Sash, who works with We the Free, who does, again, research-based, evidence-based, a look at what works on the street. They've obviously got good data, so it is going to be a really interesting panel. I look forward to that one. May I just ask you, Tom, what we were looking at? How do you feel about the words? I mean, there's a school of thought that would say that if we're to shift from the welfare paradigm, we've got to stop using the language of, say, the RSPCA. And the RSPCA talk a lot about cruelty, about treatment, about abuse. The veganism is a radical position. And if we're going to shift where we challenge property status and, try and shift the perception as animals, as individuals with rights not to be commodified, we need to change our language too and move away from the sort of RSPCA-like cruelty language to more about use and commodification and the fundamental wrongs. Would you agree on that, Laila?
I think fundamentally for us at Animal Think Tank, what we're trying to do is change the way that people see other animals and change our relationship to other animals. And I think a really important piece of that is helping to see other animals as individuals. So maybe I want to transcend some of the sort of the arguments about whether we use cruelty or whether we talk about commodities. And actually, what we want is to really help people to connect to animals as individuals who have rich inner lives. And I think that could transcend this idea of, oh, do we talk about cruelty or do we talk about use? Neither of which may be that effective to actually getting people to change the way that they see other animals. So yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind.
That's really interesting. Tom, what do you see? Do you kind of resonate with that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think as well, maybe a little bit optimistically, but I kind of think this kind of welfarist narrative we have woven through society that, we're a nation of animal lovers and, dogs and man's best friend. I think that actually is probably broadly true. I think most people in this country would view themselves as animal lovers. And so really, obviously that's a welfarist framing, but really, like, that kind of suggests that, and my experience really suggests that most people are theoretically vegan or like potentially vegan. I think most people in this country, in the right circumstances, would 100% become vegan for entirely moral reasons. So I think with language, we kind of have to be careful what we use and when. I think sometimes when we get a little bit navel-gazy and kind of jargonistic with it and kind of come up with ways that I guess are kind of, the ethically correct way of phrasing things sometimes doesn't resonate with your average person who's never confronted these issues before. And so sometimes, depending on the situation, it is more helpful, I found, to have a kind of tiering system of how you talk to people and what resonates. And I think, if you look at, how Reform UK did in these elections, the reason they did so well really is because they have very simple messaging that just viscerally resonates with people. And they have these kind of cliches that like are just quite punchy and just make people think like, yeah, I agree with that kind of soundbite. And I think sometimes that's very helpful and probably more effective than kind of arguments on whether it's use or abuse or whatever else. But also we should, as an ecosystem, we should be the more radical elements of our movement should definitely be shifting the Overton window on what's what is more widely acceptable and ethically correct.
Yeah, this has sparked something for me. I just want to add in that something that we're really trying to find is what are the aspirational identities that people hold, like, for example, animal lovers or people who care, and not because we think you have to love animals in order to, treat them with respect or these types of sort of more purist arguments, but because it's like what is going to resonate. And I think it's finding those identities and leading with shared values. As people who care about animals, nobody's going to say, actually, I don't give a shit. Maybe they will, but it's very few. So I think we're really interested in what works rather than being like, very pure in our language, I think, from Animal Think Tank anyway.
I think shared values, especially. I mean, when you look at the a nation of animal lovers, I mean, to me that really resonates with the Freedom to Marry campaign that you've talked about a lot in Animal Think Tank. When I saw the nation of animal lovers last year with Animal Rising using it, for me straight away, I was thinking straight away that's tapping into shared values. What we're talking to is individuals, lots of them, by the million, who already consider themselves animal lovers. We do as vegans. We have that shared value. Now, we know as vegans that we need to help people shift their lifestyle choices to align with their values that they already hold. That's our job, is to help people open up to those. And so finding common ground and having a conversation is far more likely to open up those possibilities. Then, unfortunately, what I experienced last month on the Nard March in Bristol, which was brilliant. It was a really, really good day. I got lots and lots of good words from it. And there we were, marching through Bristol, a lovely sunny Sunday morning, with sort of various tourists and people wandering through the streets, seeing our lovely, colourful march with inflatable animals by the dozen, lots of kids, lots of colourful banners. But then there's chant, and then there's chant. There's like, shame on you for the things you do. And I was just like, oh my goodness, what is this? It's like, and then sort of watch some of these bemused tourists wondering what on earth is just being shouted at. And you know, the difference of tapping into shared values and they're kind of shaming people, a bit extreme, that I know that, but I definitely got that whole thing with animal rights. But I do get, and I actually said in the talk just the other day, yeah, I'm not an animal lover. You know, I care about justice for animals. You know, I'm not somebody who has animal companions, and you know, don't get me started on horses. I don't want to go near them. You know, thanks. You know, let be a horse. But I definitely stand up for the rights of animals not to be used. You know, whereas some of my friends really love their animals. They really do have a deep, very, very clear relationship with their animals, and then you know they will kill them or they will eat other animals or whatever. So. It's a really interesting area. Well, look, we haven't got all day to talk about it, but thanks both for that input. I look forward to further conversations on that. There will be opportunities at the conference to sort of get involved and engage a bit more, probably ask some questions too, certainly some social media conversations to be had. Tom, you are on a panel and a workshop. I think, well, you're not on a panel, actually. You may be on a panel. I don't know yet. I haven't quite worked out all the panels. But it is one of your subjects of expertise, which is far more important. And that is ending the use of animals in laboratories. And bringing an end to the use of animals in laboratories is one of our panels. It's very much a key focus, and particularly with the recent Labour Party government, you know, now government manifesto, which states that we will partner with scientists, industry, and civil society as we work towards the phasing out of animal testing. So, what do you reckon? We've been here before, haven't we?
We've never been here before. I don't think we've ever had a manifesto pledge.
Okay.
So actually, I think this is the biggest step we've ever had from any government. It's very mealy-mouthed. It's very hedging their bets. There's no commitment to anything in it. It's saying that they're basically going to kind of look and see if they can find a way of maybe phasing it out at some point in the future. So I think parts of our movement, definitely the onus is on us to hold their feet to the fire and make sure they actually come up with a roadmap. If anyone has any connections, I'd very much like to be part of the civil society that gets on there. Whether I'm civil enough, I don't know, but I would very much like to have a voice in that room. But what you allude to, and that we've been here before, is obviously what happened back in 1997 with Tony Blair coming to power and kind of making promises around animal testing. There'd be a royal commission that he then quite heavily reneged on, and then instead devoted himself to eradicating the anti-vivisection movement. It is a little concerning to know that Tony Blair is regularly on the phone to Keir Starmer giving him advice, and that Lord Sainsbury's is also still in the background around these things. So yeah, I'm being pragmatic, and I think I've personally never been one too much for relying on politicians to do our work for us. I think, as Laila well knows, like our movement has to be a thriving ecosystem. We need people focused on system change. We also need people focused on individual change, which we're probably lacking a little bit in the anti-vivisection movement. And we also need the grassroots pressure, which is where I've always kind of thrown my hat into the ring mostly. And the reason for that is because I kind of am very aware of my own power. I'm very aware of the individual power that all of us hold. And I'm not really one to defer that power to someone else. But yeah, no, this is an exciting time. I think that there's a lot of potential. I think that, you know, there's also a lot of potential around the clear manifesto pledge to end puppy farming, which I kind of feel might be a kind of backdoor to closing MBR acres. And I feel that might be the intention around that manifesto pledge, which would be very exciting to end the farming of dogs for animal testing. You know, it's very speciesist to focus on one particular species when all of them pretty much are used in laboratories, but also it's a big stepping stone, and hopefully we can use it in a way that we should have used the banning of grey ape testing. That should have been a stepping stone that we've never really capitalized on.
I mean, Laila, in terms of your talk last week, where you mentioned it was significant landmarks and in a 40-year plan to animal liberation, which we'll come to in a minute. But if we were to ban animal testing within the next 5 years, this is a huge opportunity for a movement to really come together and achieve a significant victory. That would be far-reaching, I think, across the globe. One of the things I find really exciting, and this will be represented on the panel, is that there is now non-animal testing procedures in place. A firm called Accelerate have developed non-animal testing procedures. So, if you're a university, or if you're perhaps testing new food products or developing where you're required currently to animal test, you can now have non-animal testing procedures. You can buy them on the market, as it were. And I think that's really exciting. And I think, in terms of an inside game, if subsidies became available for that really that model got really rolled out on a big scale, that would probably be the quickest route, if you like, to a change, for animals in laboratories at the moment, I would think. But it could be a big movement, collaboration from both grassroots, from the inside game, from people working with politicians. And I think it's worth pointing out at this point, the Labour government, we don't want to attach too much baggage of what happened in the past to what could happen in the future. The Labour government have a fresh start. We've got some fresh faces. And in particular, I would point to, Kerry McCarthy, vegan MP now, vegan 30 years, MP Bristol East for the last 20 years, and very, very committed to a lot of mainly animal welfare, regulatory. I mean, that is her ground. That's she's working obviously in inside game. We're very committed animal protection MP, and people like Darryl Jones too. Labour, quite influential in the Labour Party, is also vegan for a while now. So I think there's real hope that with a well orchestrated campaign from a number of different groups, we could really push this through. And on that note, though, grassroots campaigning too, Tom, is another of your big special subjects. You'll be running a workshop too at the conference on, creating successful pressure campaigns. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So, like I said, I think the most effective way maybe not the most effective, but I think the most power that individuals can wield is to act autonomously and to take that power into our own hands and take that action ourselves. And so for me, pressure campaigning has always been a way that I, as an individual, and hopefully with my friends, we can close down businesses, we can change industry practices without having to defer that to petitioning and to politicians and to business leaders that are generally driven by profit. Rather than doing the right thing. And so for me, pressure campaigning is very powerful. I think we've seen it used very effectively throughout the history of our movement, sometimes more effectively than others. And I think there's ways like moving forward where it can be applied very strategically. And I think things, like specifically for the UK, we are an island and we rely on imports and exports of a lot of things. And part of that is laboratory animals. It's also, fur and various other things, which, and some of them Labour already cutting down on, but there is a huge potential there to eviscerate a large part of the animal research industry because they rely on these animals coming in, and also historically we've closed down a lot of places that have bred animals for animal testing, but we've also, as I said, we closed down animal agriculture facilities and fur farms and all kinds of places through pressure campaigns. So it's very effective, and I think when it's kind of combined with the wider ecosystem and that kind of inside game stuff and the individual change and the outreach and all those kind of things, I think it's a vital part of our movement. And I think it would drive the end of hunting quicker. Hopefully there's only going to be one more season anyway, but I think if we were closing down hunts, I think that would lower the chance of any kind of resurgence moving forward. So that's kind of why it's important to me and kind of what it's about for me.
And Laila, how's that tie in? Because I know you met Tom at VARC, the Vegan Animal Rights Conference back in April. I was quite inspired, I think, by each other's works. I think you attended each other's talks, panels and stuff. And since been chatting since, I believe. So I would take it that you see some of Tom's work, especially with the campaign, with the idea of pressure campaigns, is quite an instrumental part of a route map to animal liberation.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I think Tom and I met before that, but that's just a minor point. But I think really got to spend a lot of time at VARC. And yeah, I think really the thing that I'm one of the many things that I'm most inspired by Tom and I guess what Tom represents is this idea of a network or grassroots campaigning, which is autonomous, that's not waiting for a central body or organization to sort of tell them what to do or what campaigns to run. And I think so much of the power of social movements is actually about us as individuals realizing what power that we have, because I think we've been conditioned to think that we don't have power. So I think sort of on that meta level, I'm very inspired about the prospect of not only bringing back what was there a few decades ago, but really building something that has the power to actually make serious breakthroughs on a societal level. And I think it's a piece that's missing in the ecosystem currently. I think it's not really there, and I think it's missing. So I think it's an essential part of the outside game, as we like to call it, at Animal Think Tank.
So just on that note, Laila, just explain to us a little bit about what you mean for, when we talk about, and I'm going to ask actually just, shift this too about reframing. Reframing is really important for Animal Think Tank. How we frame our claims and our arguments and our advocacy, and basically how we frame veganism, animal rights. It's all really interesting. And I will hand it, I do mention that show, I was paying attention to what you had to say. And I learned a bit about that, and I'm particularly too with the welfare and abolition, we've had a revisit on that. I think partly because the importance of reframing things or framing things, as it were, correctly or with some thought behind them, is that we want to set the scene for a good conversation. We want to have a learning outcome. We want to, listen and improve our understanding. We don't necessarily have to agree. It may well be almost impossible to agree, but to understand different opinions, positions, and to have people be able to safely and clearly articulate them in a good level of discourse is probably the best we can hope for in many respects on some areas that, are just not probably likely to get over necessarily. And another one that comes into that is, of course, the animal rights and human rights, which is another hot topic within the movement. There's quite a lot of debate and division amongst that. It's very different, quite strong opinions on that. But with the framing, just bring us up to, it's one thing I really like about the idea of reframing this welfare abolition argument is into the inside-outside game, or perhaps, So how, just describe, particularly people who maybe haven't really come across this idea before, what do we mean by this?
Okay, so just to take a step back, one of the frameworks that we like to use and we're very inspired by at Animal Think Tank is this idea that the movement is an ecosystem. So we've mentioned the word ecosystem quite a lot in this show. And, it's the idea that, successful social movements have always involved individuals, groups and organizations with different theories of change working in synergy, and so there's usually some groups focused on this idea of personal transformation, so individual change. So for us that would be vegan outreach. There's another part of the ecosystem that's on creating and building alternatives. So that could be cooperatives or alternative modes of production to capitalism, or it could be in our movement sanctuaries or alternative proteins, and then there's a whole section of the ecosystem that is actually about changing the dominant institutions that shape society, and that is where the inside and outside game comes in. So you can do that. So this is systemic change. You can do that either from the inside, and that's using the sort of lawful and usual sort of routes to changing the system. So lobbying, party politics, strategic litigation. And then you've got, people putting pressure on the system from the outside, and that could be through community organising, grassroots campaigning, and it can be through mass protest. And that's really, the mass protest piece is really about shifting public opinion to then create opportunities for the rest of the ecosystem to be more radical, because the Overton window has shifted. So one suggestion is that we could reframe this sort of welfare rights dichotomy as inside outside game, because the inside game is usually more incremental, sort of transactional, not that ambitious, and then the outside game is the sort of more radical, visionary, has those transformative goals, and in a healthy ecosystem, those two, the incremental and the transformative, could be working in synergy and not sort of being harmful to each other. But I don't want to be naive and say that anything the inside game does and anything the outside game does can automatically be synergistic. You can play these roles effectively or ineffectively. So I think that's one reframe that has been put forward. And then another, I guess, reframe that I'm exploring that we're exploring at the moment in the strategy team at Animal Think Tank is this idea that welfare protections can be reframed as simple rights, and some simple rights can evolve or can grow into fundamental rights. And this is one potential roadmap to fundamental rights. Conceptually, at least, we're trying to explore the actual practical implications in the UK currently with legal experts. But to me, this is another reframe that I think is strategic, not only for within the movement, but also to the public and to legislators and to to the courts. It's like, well, animals already have these rights. We're asking for you to expand these rights to more fundamental rights. So I think there's different reframes, but I think fundamentally we do need to transcend this dichotomy between welfare and rights. And I think the other thing that the ecosystem framework does, a lot of infighting in movements is because we don't understand each other's theories of change, and then we sort of ascribe bad intentions, or you're a sellout, or you're just an emotional activist. And I think that's really unfair. And most of the time it's not true, because actually fundamentally we're all trying to do the best thing, but we have different ways that we think are going to be more effective. So one, I think it really helps to reduce this infighting. It doesn't mean that we come to a resolution, because I think we're always going to have disagreements, but there are ways of disagreeing that are healthy and unhealthy, and hopefully an ecosystem framework can help us disagree in a healthy way. But then secondly, I think there is this idea that there is one right way and my way is the right way. And actually, fundamentally, we need all of these pieces and more. This is a very simplistic framework. So yeah, I think we waste so much energy and we lose power as a movement and as a collective by fighting with each other, when actually we should be focusing on the task at hand.
I absolutely agree, and I have found the Animal Think Tank work on framing really useful on a personal level, for very much for those reasons. Is that we need to just, what was the word you used? Healthy disagreements. We can have a healthy disagreement, and I think also the important thing is it's just basic common sense. Is that if you want to influence people who you think maybe could do things better, and I think there is an argument very much to say, well, look, we've got limited resources. As vegans, we should be very much focusing on the end of the use of animals and animal liberation and total liberation. We shouldn't be putting our resources, be that volunteer time or money or donations or whatever, into welfare campaigns. We've got the RSPCA to do all that. We've already got lots of welfare, big groups to do that. As vegans, we should be focusing our precious resources, but I don't think we should. I mean, I subscribe to that, but I don't think we should fall out about it. And I've certainly got friends of mine who I very much like and respect, who do welfare campaigns as well as environmental campaigns, as well as animal sanctuary volunteering, as well as vegan street outreach, and we, one of the things that came through very clearly at VARG, and I credit Matty Glover for a really good introductory speech. I think you both saw that. was to point out just how blooming small we are up against, a really big machine. And I think you pointed out that the entire vegan global marketing budget is smaller than McDonald's budget. And that's just McDonald's. Never mind Burger King, never mind all the corporations, Tyson Foods and all the rest of it, and all the international, and so it's really important that we keep a really good, healthy, respectful collective, but that we don't shy away from the important issues. There's research emerging, for example, just this year, that welfare campaigns do hold back a shift to veganism. We need to, as advocates around us, we have to have these conversations, and every justice movement needs a healthy discourse and is going to have people who disagree. I mean, look what's just happened in France. The left have come together in the face of the threat of the right wing, and they've come from third to first, because the really extreme left and the very centre left and almost the centre right have actually come together in the face. And that's an example of how, we really do need to, because we've got a climate crisis and we've got animals going by the billion. We haven't got time to sit around having just sort of arguments about it. We've got to treat each other respectfully and still have these conversations. What I love about, both you, Laila, with Animal Think Tank as a collective, and Tom, you as an individual advocate, goes back to the old school, counts as an old school, is that, we need to do better as a collective in the way we address each other. And it's a fundamental requirement that we've done really poorly at that over the last decade. We've got a lot better, I think, post-COVID. And it's really important that now, if we're going to really act now, we've got a chance here, we've got a new landscape to really act, and it's an opportunity to really put all of this thought and what we've been talking about into practice. That's having good discourse, and I hope that the conference will in part achieve that by really being demonstrating that we can embrace different opinions strongly and treat each other respectfully. And I think by doing so, we're more likely to get learning outcomes, but probably more likely to sway people into our own way of thinking if we're actually polite and respectful to them. Using the term welfarist as a pejorative term is just so last decade. We really need to move on from that kind of concept. It's just not fair. At the same time, if we're not going to fight for the rights of individual animals to be free and liberated, and if we're going to endure this welfare paradigm and not do anything to change it, we're also letting down the animals. So we have to find solutions. Brilliant.
Can I just interject slightly?
Tom,
just because we're talking about people disagreeing, which they do, and like Laila says, I think a lot of that comes down to people not understanding each other's theory of change, and we all have our own unique, often, version of what that is, what we think will be effective. From my experience, we very rarely actually know. Like, often things we think are going to be effective turn out not to be. Things we think are pointless turn out to be super effective. But I also think, and like taking it back to the pressure campaigning stuff, I think at the moment something our movement is missing is a way for just regular people to take action, to know what they're doing, like what are people meant to be doing. And because we don't have particularly, like, it's changing, but we don't have those large grassroots, or like not even organizations, but pressure campaigns that people can just like send off and get a bunch of stickers, a bunch of leaflets, a bunch of posters, like make a placard, go out, hold a protest. People don't know where their energy's meant to be. So you can either join We the Free, or you can join Animal Rising or Save. You can join one of those groups and kind of, take action when there's an action organized for you, or maybe, a few people will be local coordinators or whatever. But for me, for most people, like 99% of the country, and certainly 99% of the movement, I think people are just kind of lacking structure and guidance on what they can do. And although we want autonomous action, we want people to be free thinking and take the initiative, people need the inspiration and the guidance and the structure to be able to do that. And that is, I think, what is missing. And I think if we had more of that, and we are seeing it, there's, you know, a Facebook group launched a couple of weeks ago focused on the suppliers of MBR acres, which seems to be, you know, inspiring people to take action locally again. But if we have more of that, then I think maybe we'll see a little bit less of the infighting, because if you don't have a clear idea of where you're going to take your protest, it's a lot easier just to sit down and kind of criticize what other people are doing, or, you know, get a little bit anal over maybe what words people are using or how people are interacting. And so I'd much rather see people out on the streets and taking action, but I think it's up to all of us really to focus on how we inspire people to do that, and we kind of have to lead that from the front, I think. And also, actually, sorry, there's something else that popped up earlier, and it was something you mentioned, Tim, about animal rights and human rights, and that's something that is actually, I think, a massive potential problem that is facing our movement, is this division, and super unhealthy and unhelpful division of, I guess, like the animal first idea, which completely discounts the reality that humans are animals, which is just objective fact. And it then also deepens this concept that humans are somehow different from other animals, which I think personally is the one thing we need to bridge. We need to be encouraging and explaining and demonstrating to everyone that other animals experience the world very similarly to us. Their experiences in the abattoir, the vivisection laboratory, the fur farm, are very similar to what our experiences would be. And there's literally no scientific reason to think otherwise. And so to kind of other animals by saying that humans aren't as good as animals are better than people, like, we're just reinforcing this divide, which is the literal problem we have in the first place. So yeah, just wanted to throw that in.
I absolutely agree. We will be having a good debate about that, Tom. And one of the things, Laila, again, the points the animal think tanks helped me personally to learn to, you know, to frame these things so that they're actually more useful for the listener. It's not about winning a debate or having your say and having the last say or any of that. It's about presenting different opinions for people to increase their learning and understanding and graduate towards their own positions, which then again may change, as mine has recently on several levels, not hugely, just subtly, and for the good, I'd say. You know, I know that it's a better framework. So, but very much hope we'll achieve that, Tom, because it is a big issue there. Laila, you've got a route map. You are the keynote. You're doing the keynote. It's the only one. All the rest panels, and I know you feel a bit, you know, like nervous about that or something, but, you know, the reason being is because of that very thing that Tom was referring to, is you have a route map. You put some time and energy into creating a route map. It's quite well thought through. There's some quite, you know, there's research. It's evidence-based. It's a study. It's not just made up like some of us just tend to make stuff up. You know, it's quite well researched, thought through. So, just briefly, tell us a little bit about that, just in a nutshell, without having to go through, because I know it'll change by the time we get to September. That'll, you know, it's work in progress, isn't it? It's sort of constantly changing anyway. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know how to put 18 months of research in a nutshell, but I'll try. Yeah, so fundamentally, you know, we are very inspired by other social movements, and, you know, they have managed to build, you know, successful social movements have built unity and momentum around shared high-level goals. And so, you know, that's kind of what we've been trying to uncover for our movement, or at least for Animal Think Tank and the social movement that we are trying to seed. You know, if we want to get to, you know, what is our grand objective? Is it currently sort of the placeholder is fundamental rights for other animals, but it could be political representation, or it could be something else. And what are the, so in 40 years, let's say we want to achieve this thing. So what are the milestones that we need to achieve sort of between 5 and 15 years that we can, you know, as a movement orient around? And that doesn't mean that we're all doing the same thing. It's like we're focused on a particular focus area, but, you know, doing what we do best, whether it's pressure campaigning, whether it's, you know, one-to-one outreach, whether it's the inside game, but that we're actually focusing our attention on something so that we can achieve a breakthrough rather than, working in our silos and actually not really making meaningful progress in any one area. So that's the sort of meta framing and why we think it's important. And yeah, we're sort of, I don't know, let's say 75% of the way through this research, which most of it has been through consultations with so many people in the movement ecosystem, organization leaders. We've done one-to-one interviews with so many people, with legal experts, political experts. We've run workshops with grassroots activists. Tom was in one of our workshops, and we've also done focus groups with the meat-eating public, all with the aim of identifying the strategic opportunities, but also to build what we call build-in. So it's not like, oh, look, we've come up with a plan, guys, let's all get behind it. But it's actually, trying to be this participatory, collaborative process. And we have all learned so much through this, and it's been very humbling because actually we've done a lot of, interviews with people in very different parts of the ecosystem than where we place ourselves. And, this ecosystem framework has become sort of a lived thing for us in that, yeah, now I have a much better understanding of different theories of change and how they're playing out in our movement. So we have come up with one particular map to fundamental rights. There is an infinite number of maps that any of us could come up with. But what we're currently doing is just getting that ready to share with others in the movement for feedback, but also hopefully as an example of a map that then maybe others could create a map for ending factory farming, or what is a potential map for political representation for other animals. And the idea being that we can then look at these maps collectively and find those nodes or those areas that could actually push multiple pathways forward. So we're still very much in that process. It won't be finished by the Vegan Party Conference, I don't think, but definitely I feel like it's an exciting project that hopefully will come out with something meaningful, and that at least some groups would be able to orient around and actually make meaningful change together, which I think is the hope.
Brilliant. Well, I think it's really important to have a route map. It just helps clarify people too about the importance of individual change, but also system change, institution change. We've obviously got different strategies and tactics. And, we are fighting on a number of fronts, but I see three really clear goals. is, we can really change legislation. We've got a chance here of establishing moral rights and enshrined in law for animals. We could really make progress in the next few years, significant progress in that. And there's a real chance, I think, to get a lot of individuals to go vegan over the next few years. The veganism had a little dip for various reasons, but it's on the way back. It's re-emerging itself. There's a lot of very cool people in public places now who are vegan. There's a lot of role models. It's going to have a big growth again over the next 5 years. I'm sure of that, and certainly we can accelerate that on an individual level. But then the third one is a really important one. That's shift to plant-based food systems amongst institutions, corporations especially. And that work is really beginning to snowball. The success of the Plant-Based Treaty, Plant-Based Universities, Plant-Based Councils particularly is really exciting. And one of the things I really hope that our movement will, it obviously parts already are, but will emerge and more, is to be able to multitask and to focus on different shifts at different times without compromising each other. And I think Plant-Based Treaty actually does that really well, because they've got a really solid animal rights position that underpins them. All their work is essentially increasing plant-based options, but it doesn't throw animals under the bus because it's well thought through from an animal rights position. And that's sort of what's given me real confidence and belief that we can really multitask as a movement, really achieve what look to be quite different goals at times. But the idea now, getting moral rights for animals established in law, so animals are actually protected by law, is a really big, achievable ask, in my opinion. Do you share that, Tom? Do you think that's doable? Do you think we will see that before the end of the decade?
Wait, what year is it? Maybe 2024. Yeah, maybe.
Next 5 years.
Yeah, I think it's probably achievable. I think a lot of animals already have some obviously very welfare protections that would just be a matter of tightening them. I think where it becomes an issue maybe a little bit more is like where you see things as exemptions, like around animal testing, where there is literally no legal protection for any animal in any laboratory. So that seems a little bit harder. I mean, it's definitely possible. To be honest, it's not a focus I've had. So maybe Laila will have a stronger idea around this. But I do think, sorry, I cut back to that. But we're talking just now about how the different types of individuals and groups in our movement, the different tactics and strategies we all have, and kind of building this ecosystem. And I do think it's important to comment, just from my experience of the recent movement, that away from the kind of social media comment sections, when you're actually getting people together, like I'm feeling this kind of unity that I don't think I've ever felt in our movement. Like I'm being invited into spaces I'd never have been invited into 20 years ago. And around VARC, like I met with Laila and a few other like people and organizations, and just the kind of feeling of these like national organizations and then all working towards different aspects of the movement, the system change, the individual change, the grassroots things, and the grassroots activists, and everyone just kind of coming together and being very positive about how we can unify. And my focus recently has been on what Laila alluded to earlier, which is rebuilding or helping to rebuild the grassroots local group network we used to have, and we've been doing that in our local town. And we had our first meeting just a couple of weeks ago, and we had, I think there was 30 people there, and it was people from like from the local area, but from all across the movement, people from We the Free, from Save, from we had plant-based councils. I think there are 3 different hunt saboteur groups, the local grassroots group, the people who do the the old school kind of outreach stuff, and everyone was in the room and everyone was chatting and mingling. And like We the Free activists were signing up to go sabbing, and sabs were signing up to go on vigils, and like everyone was kind of excited to be part of something bigger than their silo, and it was very inspiring to see. And I think really that the big thing that this is pertinent to is the kind of the systems that we're kind of building out of it. So you had hunt saboteurs offering to give any intelligence they found while out in the fields of, say, farms or centers of exploitation out in the countryside. They were offering to pass that on to a group of people that wanted to do farm investigations. And then We the Free were asking for that footage to be able to potentially make like locally sourced, if you like, 3-minute movie challenge videos. And obviously they may not be allowed to, I don't know how it works, but there's these ideas of collaboration like that. And then everyone talking about having petitions for their specific aspect of the movement, but with a shared email list coming off of it. So anyone that signs up, it gets pulled with the whole local animal liberation community, and then we can reach out to people and hopefully mobilize. And so off the back of it, we're looking at getting a coach load of people for the next World Day, which would be like 70 people just from Dorset. So so when people are getting together and being given that inspiration and kind of being encouraged to talk and think and celebrate our movement, then these things are happening, and they can definitely happen, and they will happen more. So yeah, that's where I'm at, and that's what I'm excited to be part of. And I think that's kind of what Laila's working towards too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing I wanted to say, we don't have time to go into the moral rights thing, Tim, but I think that if we can achieve whatever we want to achieve, if we can actually work together and focus on a shared goal, obviously within reason, and there's got to be political will, but I think that this collaboration and this unity that Tom is talking about, I think this is the necessary but not sufficient condition for us to actually make a breakthrough, whether it's to do with moral rights protections, whether it's to do with ending testing on animals, or any of these things that feel somehow within reach. it does depend on different parts of the ecosystem coming together, collaborating, and actually, coordinating in a way that I'm not sure has happened, at least in my short experience in the movement.
I'm hoping very much that the Vegan Party Conference will really act as a catalyst for a lot of that and really help sharpen our focus. Because something like ending animal testing is going to be a really good example of how all of the different parts of the movement ecology, the different parts can work together to achieve that. It's a really tangible goal too. It'll be really far-reaching. I think it's a really one within reach, that we can really achieve. And that idea that we can act as a movement, as a mass movement, that we can act together, that we can really grow up and evolve and get beyond some of the things that have been holding us back and achieve on the levels of some of the other social justice movements. So I'm really thrilled. Thank you for joining us because you share that vision. I know a lot of us share that vision. You're not alone if you're... who was it? John Lennon? Was it something about, you're not the only one. There's plenty of us on this. Yeah, I really believe that we can do this and prepare to sort of perhaps put some of our own, ideas that we've held on to for a long time aside and open up to some new interesting concepts. And Tom, I will just mention that, it's a personal thing, but your book really set me straight. I found a newfound respect for the old school animal rights activists. Bearing in mind, I was always doing vegan outreach in the 80s and 90s, and with a flourish, we were ravers and parties. We were like, come and join us, have a good time. Come and have a veg burger. It really opened my eyes up. I feel a lot closer and got a lot more respect for the as it were, the ordinary folk off the street who just decided to get up and do something and mobilise themselves in a time before social media and such like. Real newfound respect and admiration for those old school animal rights activists. So really thankful for that. Thank you for putting that into words. And I would heartily recommend anybody, particularly if you have lived through, it's a living history. There you go. Nobody Kills Puppies, Tom Harris. It's a really good read, absolutely essential for any animal rights activist. I would say you need to learn the history of the movement you joined. There's a really good example of the history of the movement that you just joined. And Laila, thank you so much because you really have been a breath of fresh air. You and your team, I know you like to include your team. We've benefited from having the likes of Natalie and also Beth, Rob, quite a few other people from Animal Think Tank. They really like your work, and I think it's going to really become into shape. I know there's a number of groups that have been paying attention to you, quietly working with you behind the scenes to help shape their campaigns. And all I would say is I'd encourage anybody thinking along the lines of how can we grow this into a mass movement to really tune in, pay attention, because there's a good collective growing that believes that this is possible. And I do believe, deep down, that we have the knowledge, the experience, we have the tools in the locker, and we have the desire, and we have the focus, and we have the ability to really do justice for animals over the next 5 years, particularly. And the Vegan Party Conference would be a really good place to come and join us and start with us. So thank you. If you'd like to say goodbye before we end.
Yeah, well, thank you, Tim, for always being such a great champion. And yeah, goodbye.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. You've always been supportive, and I'm glad my book had an impact. I'm glad that came across.
That's brilliant. Well, folks, thanks very much. Thanks for listening. And there's a conversation on Facebook. I'm sure to continue. You're very welcome. And there'll be another live stream in hopefully about 3 weeks, August 1st, Thursday, 6 p.m. Guests, TBC. All being well. See you later.